You're listening to The Authenticity Show, where you get to eavesdrop on great conversations about health, creativity, and the quest for excellence. Your hosts are Carlos Casados and Satch Purcell. Today, Carlos and Satch are talking about intestinal bacteria, Genghis Khan, and the wisdom of ancient Chinese doctors.
You know, I grew up as a vegetarian, right? And all my life I heard, if, you know, you're a vegetarian, you're going to get anemic, you know, because vegetarians don't get enough vitamin B12 and, you know, you can only get that from meat. And I think our discussion about bacteria has reminded me of something that I had learned in the past, which was that the meat isn't making B12 either. It's bacteria that make B12. And if the cows, the pigs, the chickens, if they're eating grains or, you know, food that is maybe not held to the same cleanliness standards that human food is, there's going to be bacteria on that food. So they're actually eating the bacteria that are producing the B12. And it's a fascinating idea, is that if maybe we ate food that was just a little bit not so clean, you know, that maybe there wouldn't be as much anemia in vegetarians, you know, but pesticides kill those bacteria. We wash everything, we boil everything, not to say we shouldn't wash our food, but, you know, it's the idea that humans lived a long time on this planet with not necessarily the same cleanliness standards, and that it's not always bad. There are some benefits to that. It's an interesting idea anyway.
Right. And, you know, some nutritional content is absorbed better when it's cooked, if it's not overcooked. And some is absolutely destroyed by overcooking. So it's pretty key. I mean, obviously enzymes don't withstand high heat, and bacteria doesn't either. So if you're going to get some of those positive bacteria strains into your body, and if you're going to get some of the enzymes into your body, and even things like, vitamin C and MSM, methylsulfonylmethane, right, which helps repair and connective tissues. Those things get cooked out of food real easily. So I think you do need a good mix of, you know, good old-fashioned healthy roughage from, you know, fresh vegetables and fruit, and hopefully organically grown foods that don't have, you know, a bunch of toxic chemicals on them and things like that. But you've got to get a lot of that in your system, even if you are taking in cooked food. And I would imagine anybody who leads a healthy lifestyle would need that even more, because they need all those vitamins and minerals. You know.
I'm reminded of a time I saw a show. It was with some Inuit people or Eskimos, that part of the world, and they were talking about how they stay warm when they're out in the freezing cold in the snow. And their answer to that was not to cook your meat. So when you eat raw meat, you'll stay warm out in those freezing temperatures. If you cook your meat, you'll freeze.
Right.
So it's just a reminder that there's all kinds of things that maybe we don't even yet understand about food and cooking food. And, you know, there's so much more to learn. You know?
Absolutely.
It's so fascinating. What are your thoughts about, what do you have to say about fermentation?
Well, one thing, some cultures do a lot of it. I mean, you'll find Asians fermenting a lot. I mean, you see the kimchi, and a lot of the Vietnamese do it, and the Chinese, they ferment their vegetables in clay pots and so on. And that's a bacteriologically rich kind of a food. And, you know, it's a remedy for them. But we don't do it as much here. We tend to, when we do eat pickled foods, it's dead. It's not live. It's done with chemicals and things to get them to ferment. And then by the time it gets into your mouth and you're chewing it up, it's not even active anymore.
It's the finished product of fermentation, just vinegar or something, and it's not living.
Much like alcohol. I mean, alcohol's a fermented food, but it's dead fermented food in a sense. There's a euphoric, relaxing quality to it, which is possibly beneficial, but it's not necessarily good for your digestion or for your overall health.
Right.
I mean, besides the blood pressure components there with the red wine and things like that. But I mean, as far as being a living food, it just doesn't have that.
Yeah.
And I would think that when you have a portion of your food that is fermented, I could argue that that's similar in some ways to a primal human being who's eating some foods that haven't been refrigerated and maybe are starting to ferment a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, and if we had stronger HCl in our stomachs to kill off the bad bacteria and the strains that actually made it through benefited us, we did it in the right way, in the right balance, I could imagine that making us a lot stronger and healthier.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there are a lot of manuals and in places like health food stores where you can find ways to ferment vegetables and things.
Oh yeah. And I know that you and I have both done this. You know, we know others that do wild fermentation at home.
Yeah.
And I got to admit, the first time I did it, you know, I made some sauerkraut and some fermented vegetables at home, and I had to overcome a massive mental barrier to put that vegetable in my mouth for the very first time, because I saw it bubbling on top of my refrigerator for you know, days upon days. And it took some guts, speaking of guts in this conversation, it took some guts to get that into my guts. You know, I mean, I opened this thing up, I'm seeing like that cabbage and those carrots and stuff have been sitting in that jar for, you know, a week and a half. And I took it out and I had to like, okay, all right, 3, 2, 1, go. And I pop it in my mouth. I'm like, oh, that's actually quite tasty.
Yeah.
You know, I was amazed, because I think we're a little bit freaked out, you know, in our culture, especially, you know, in the United States, you know, where we have
foodborne illnesses.
Yeah, foodborne illnesses.
Threaten your life.
Botulism, you know, and all these things. And it turns out that when you start learning about fermented food, it's actually incredibly safe, because those bad bacteria, they can't survive in there very well with those healthy bacteria, the ones that we need, you know, inside of our gut.
It's all about pH.
Yeah. And it was, you know, a heck of an experience to have done that myself at home.
Yeah, I was, speaking of nervousness around a food creation, I was nervous the first time I put a spoonful of my own yogurt.
Oh, yeah.
You know, when I made that the first time, I thought, ooh, I hope this doesn't turn my tummy.
Right. You could picture yourself in the emergency room or something,
right,
you know.
Yeah, or at least tossing it up somehow, distastefully. But, you know, it's a bit like the concept of eating your own cooking. You know, if you know, I believed in the idea of it and I wanted to try it. And before I pawn it off on anybody else, I want to make sure that I could eat it myself and I enjoy it.
Right.
I make kimchi still. I still have a big jar of spicy kimchi because I don't go through it that quickly. But I made a lot of it and it came out really, really tasty.
Nice.
It's really good.
Very good. Yeah, I've made, you know, fermented vegetables. I've made interesting sauerkrauts and things like that. And it's a heck of an experience. I mean, anybody who has not done this, I would highly encourage to do it. You have to have the experience yourself to go, oh my gosh, I made that. And it's got these healthy bacteria in it. And, you know, you can notice a difference in your gut, you know, eating food like that. I did feel a little bit of a transition for a few days, you know, but I felt like my gut overcame it rather quickly and actually felt better afterwards.
That's really great. Well, and there's so many options. There's even lactose-free options, and you know, people can do coconut kefir if they really can't digest milk. Although most people do find that if they had trouble digesting pasteurized milk products, they're actually okay with things like kefir.
Yeah, that's right.
Kefir,
that's right.
However you pronounce that, is like yogurt, like liquid yogurt in a way. It just is a slightly different process. And, you know, it's very rich in B vitamins and all those active cultures that are good for you. So once it goes through that process, the lactose, those sugars that come from the milk are all but digested. And so it doesn't really trigger the same kind of reaction unless someone has an allergy to casein, you know, the milk protein or something.
Exactly.
But then there's coconut kefir.
Yeah, that's right.
And there are all sorts of tasty herbal drinks that you can make that are fizzy. You know, like we like to have our sodas or whatever, you can
Yeah.
make low sugar versions of really tasty ginger ale, for example, by fermenting some of the ginger,
Right.
putting some of the
Yeah.
kefir water in there, letting it sit, and then it bubbles, and eventually you put it in a container and seal it, and you've got this really excellent homemade ginger ale, and you can make herbal variants of it by adding things like, I mean, imagine a Thai ginger, basil, lemon, bubbling soft drink.
Right.
I mean,
And you can do that.
Wow.
Yeah, you can probably go on YouTube and find something like that. And
Exactly.
people can do this at home and have that experience.
all
It's
the stuff
amazing.
so easily done these days, because there are a lot of people who blaze that trail, and there's free information on how to do it. It's not hard at all. It's not unsafe, and you just need a few things, and you're raring to go. Genghis Khan, we know, conquered mass amounts of territory, and he absorbed the cultures around him and said, basically,
Yeah.
we are the Borg, your uniqueness will be added to our own. Resistance is
Yeah.
futile. He went and he spread throughout the lands and conquered those lands. And one of the problems that occurred for a lot of people at that time was dysentery and other gastrointestinal problems like dysentery. One of the best ways to prevent that, besides clean sources and things like that, is to have a very strong immune system, strong intestinal flora. And Genghis Khan is known to have demanded that all of his troops have yogurt. And they made whatever, it might have been goat yogurt, or
Yak yogurt,
yak
or whatever it
yogurt,
was.
or whatever they had locally at the time.
Horse
But they
yogurt,
would make yogurt, and it would be this fermented beverage that they would drink. And it made them quite strong and resistant to many diseases and illnesses. And the other people that didn't do that, well, we know what happened. I mean, dysentery can knock out 2/3 of your army, and then what are you going to do?
Right, exactly. It's hard to fight when you have diarrhea.
It is hard to fight.
Yeah.
It happens to me all the time. And
Yeah,
I just know it's really hard to fight when I have diarrhea.
Yeah.
But yeah. So it's great. And it was a really powerful, I think, it has its place in history to think of how important, cultured foods like yogurt and kefir and things like that, and their place in society. I mean, we probably wouldn't have developed the kinds of society that we have without being able to master the art of preserving foods and fermenting foods and all the things that came, including all the orgies and parties of the Greeks and all and the Egyptians and all the Vikings and today all the wineries that we visit and brew houses and so on. I mean, just fermenting is a gift.
Yeah.
Humankind has done many great things with it.
Those little bacteria, they're good buddies. They're helping us out.
buddies.
They are helping us out,
They make me feel more cultured.
Yeah, very good. The bacteria in your intestines, they are utilizing resources. And so imagine a dangerous bacteria were to gain entry into somebody's colon, let's say, or their small intestine, and could make them sick. Well, that bacteria is now living in a community with, 100 trillion or so other bacteria. And those other bacteria are utilizing resources. And so the bad bacteria now has to compete for resources with these healthy bacteria, and they tend to lose that battle because the intestinal flora are more suitable to that environment. They know how to succeed in that environment. They're going to beat out the foreign invader. The other interesting thing is that a bacteria that could cause illness might get into somebody's gut, and it needs a place to adhere to. It's got to stick to the epithelial lining inside the intestines. And they have to also compete for space, like they have to have some place to cling. And there's no place to cling when you've got trillions of other cells in there that are supposed to be there, that have already set up shop, and they're living there. There's no room for these other bacteria. And so it's really quite simple. There's no room for the bad guys when your gut or your urinary tract or your nasal cavity or your mouth or maybe even your ears or your skin, when all the seats are taken by the good guys, So it's just, it's a fascinating thing.
That makes so much sense, Satch. And speaking on that, and this may shock some people who are into health food, but alkaline water is a huge thing these days. And from what I've gathered, it's a huge mistake to drink tons and tons of alkaline water because your stomach acid is acid, HCl, and you're dumping an alkaline substance directly into your acid environment. Well, what's going to happen? You're going to dilute the stomach acid, and what does that cause? It causes changes in your digestion that might not be healthy for you. A lot of misconceptions about the whole acid-alkaline thing when it comes to foods. There's a difference between taking a fresh, raw vegetable, chewing and eating it, which may have acidic properties, but digests in the body and allows your bloodstream to produce more alkaline chemistry.
Yes.
There's a difference between that and saying that the fruit or vegetable is alkaline. An orange is not alkaline. But a fresh orange, when you digest it, well, first of all, it's acidic, and as it breaks down, because of the living enzymes and the chemistry and the way your body handles it, you do produce more alkaline components in your blood, which blood needs to be slightly alkaline, but there's lots of parts of the body that do not need to be alkaline. In fact, if they are alkaline, you're in trouble.
Yeah. In Chinese medicine, we talk about foods and herbal medicines as having a nature. And the nature is usually likened to a temperature. That some foods are warming, some foods are cooling, some herbs are hot, some herbs are cold, some herbs are neutral. What's interesting about it is that we often talk about the nature of the food itself as well as the post-digestive nature of the food.
Right.
So that if you were to eat something, like for example, you might drink a cold beverage that its temperature is cold, but its post-digestive temperature is warm.
Interesting.
So it's like if you were to make chili pepper ice cream, that's a cold experience, but the nature of the ice cream is actually warm,
Yeah,
so
good point.
That's an ancient concept in Chinese medicine that once you digest something, it could have a very different effect than the nature of that food or herb before you eat it, before you consume it.
That's fascinating, Satch. How do you suppose that they discovered those things or classified those things? I mean, what's the logic behind it that they used to try to figure that out?
Sometimes it was just simply looking at what does the substance do in the body. For example, if something makes you sweat, then, heat makes you sweat. On a hot day, you sweat. So therefore, does that mean that the nature of that food or that herb is warm or hot or something? Sometimes it actually has to do with how it makes you feel. Sometimes you do consume things and they do make you a little bit cold, But I think the other thing is that ancient Chinese doctors, having less distractions in their environment, having to sit, in silence, just in nature, are a little bit more in tune with their bodies. This is sort of the theory, that they were a little bit more in tune with their bodies. And that people in those societies noticed things that maybe people in our society don't. When you're rocking out your MP3 player and you're driving down the freeway and you're late for some place, you're maybe not noticing the amount of gas building up in your intestines from the milk tea that you just had, a little while, earlier in the day, So we're not as in tune with our bodies because we have so many outside distractions, and those ancient cultures did not have as many of those distractions. And so they're a little bit more able to notice what was occurring in their body. I've had that experience, when I was doing Vipassana meditation. Day after day of doing deep meditation, I started to notice things about myself that I didn't notice before. I thought, and it caused me to think about these things. Yeah, it is very down to earth to think that you can perceive how something would affect you. And I do recall a time when, after several days of meditation, in the evening, I switched to a different herbal tea that I was drinking. Because, during Vipassana, you're not really supposed to have dinner. But maybe you could have, some lemon water or some herb tea or something. And I didn't eat, I drank a spicy tea that had a lot of cinnamon and cardamom and, those types of, warm spices, warm by Chinese medicine, logic anyway. And I must admit, to my surprise, I was not expecting this. In the evening meditation, I felt very hot, sweaty, and agitated. I actually felt stingy on my skin.
Wow.
And I had never felt anything like that before, but it was because my distractions were eliminated. I was tuning into my body at a deep level, and I recall that experience as a very teachable moment. Like, wow, I cannot meditate and drink that spicy tea anymore, because I experienced the hot, pungent nature of those ingredients that were in that. And it was a simple herb tea. It was like one tea bag, something that we wouldn't think of as being very powerful. But, it was powerful. I had a terrible meditation.
What a great example of what you were just saying about the ancient doctors.
Yeah.
And this,
right.
You had this environment where you were totally focused in on your perceptions, and you were developing a really refined level of attention being held for long periods of time until you gained the ability to differentiate very small and subtle differences. And when you were tuned to that level of awareness, and the volume, so to speak, was cranked up very high in comparison to your normal everyday existence.
That's exactly.
You noticed
what it was
this
like.
very, by most people's standards, insignificant difference to you was very significant during that time, right?
Right, exactly.
What a great example.
And it also causes me to think that, what if your intestinal bacteria were imbalanced, creating byproducts of a hot nature? Or byproducts of a cold nature.
Right.
And over the course of 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, a lifetime, we're simply unaware because we never had an opportunity to know or to think or to notice, or to understand. Again, so much to learn about these things, but sometimes a simple experience that somebody has really can have a tremendous amount of value. That has affected me ever since I had that experience. And it's caused me to really buy into this idea of hot herbs, cold herbs, neutral herbs, even the flavors of herbs. In Chinese medicine, they'll say that, this herb is sweet. And I taste it and I go, it doesn't seem sweet to me. But then they'll also say that a potato is sweet. Right. I think, if you think about it, it is a starchy
and rice.
Sweet. Yeah, and rice is considered sweet, right? Yeah. So there is an element of sweetness, but maybe with such gross perceptions, we just simply miss it.
You're listening to The Authenticity Show, where you get to eavesdrop on great conversations about health, creativity, and the quest for excellence. Your hosts are Carlos Casados and Satch Purcell. Next up, Carlos and Satch talk about the Human Microbiome project, which eventually leads to an interesting discussion about the nature of the self. Stay tuned.
So the National Institutes of Health has the Human Microbiome project, and this is kind of a really neat, big, project that's out there now that's right up our alleys. I mean, they're promoting these scientists to do this interesting research on investigating the human microbiome and all the bacteria that are not only in our intestines, but on our skin and in our noses and our eyes and our ears and our mouths. And this is producing some fascinating research. One interesting thing that they recently discovered is a bacteria in the gut called Christensenella minuta, or C. minuta. And C. minuta is involved in lean body types. And so did you read this, Carlos?
I did. Actually, you reminded me of Tiny Tim for some reason when you said that. Tom Thumb.
Tom Thumb?
Sounds like a little, like a small Nordic person from a fairy tale or something like that.
Yeah, totally.
Cristianella Minuta.
Yes, I like it.
Lived in a pocket. And he went to school with Johnny or Johan.
You killing me over here. Yeah. So this bacteria, it's fascinating because they took mice in the study. They took mice that were obese, and they took this bacteria and they put it into these overweight mice, and they lost weight. It's fascinating.
It is just the whole thought that whatever was going on bacteriologically was controlling their metabolism.
Yeah.
I mean, that's fascinating. I mean, people didn't talk about that 10 years ago, really.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And so it brings up the question, is the bacteria really controlling the host? I mean, it would seem that there is some control of the host by these bacteria. And this is not the first time this has happened.
Right.
They've also found in this Human Microbiome project, another study was looking at how the bacteria can actually affect the circadian rhythm of the host. It can play with your sleep and wake cycles. I mean, this is this little tiny bacteria creating chemistry that can affect the way your brain behaves.
Right. Yeah, because they're just doing recent studies with DNA, and they're finding that people who are night owls, there are certain genetic predispositions that can be measured that they find consistently in people who are naturally night owls.
Like me?
Yeah, me too. Yeah, and so, it makes you, kind of brings the question to mind. Is the microbiomes, or is it specifically the DNA? I mean, it's curious.
Yeah, it is. It's fascinating. The study on the circadian rhythms, they were talking about how the bacteria produce butyric acid, which ends up having this effect on the brain. Mm-hmm. What they found in previous studies was that the host could affect the cycles of behavior of the bacteria, which makes sense because they're going to become active versus less active based upon when we eat, when we sleep, because they're feeding off of us, right? So we're naturally going to affect them. But guess what? They affect us too. Mm-hmm. It's fascinating. We were just looking at that article talking about acne and the microbiome on the skin, right? Or the bacteria on the skin, how certain bacteria cause the acne, but then we give antibiotics to kill those bacteria to treat the acne, when another approach is that there was from the beginning just an imbalance of the bacteria on the skin. So there's all these other bacteria on the skin that inhibit infections and things like that. And maybe we should just bring those guys up because they know how to handle the bacteria that's causing the acne.
Rather than creating a solution that actually becomes a problem.
Yeah, and then we kill all of them, and then it's anybody's guess who's going to repopulate the skin.
Right.
I
mean, this has to necessarily change your philosophy because, arguably, you filter what it is you're looking for based upon your underlying outlook.
Yeah.
your philosophy.
Yeah.
So, as we start to incorporate more complex systems thinking, it has to change the way we filter the world. It's our internal representation. It's a structure of our reality of how we're structuring our search within that philosophical and belief-centered set of filters that allows us to look for new information.
Yeah. Well, this reminds me, one time I was telling this psychiatrist about an experience I had when I was in India. These ladies would come to the hotel room and they would ask if they could clean the rooms for us. And so you give them some rupees, and these are very, very poor people, and
not roofies,
right? Rupees, right? Indian currency. And for a handful of rupees, they'll wipe up your room and clean everything. And so the lady that was cleaning our room had this rag, and she was cleaning up all around the toilet. Now, mind you, in India, this is a hole in the ground. Okay, that's what I mean when I say toilet. She's cleaning up all this kind of, not so nice stuff around the toilet. Then she just reaches over and grabs a plate and starts wiping the plate with the same rag. So then she left, and then my mom, of course, quickly re-cleaned everything in the whole place, right? And then the psychiatrist says, doesn't our knowledge of bacteria just change the way we look at the world?
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
I mean, we have a totally different internal representation than this lady who does not have a concept of bacteria. That's not something in her realm of knowledge or understanding.
And I'm sure many of us listening to this are cringing as much as I am. Just even thinking about that.
Exactly. Yeah. I try not to think about it.
Right.
Yeah,
Try not to think about it.
Hey, Carlos, could you talk a little bit about the different types of supplement categories or substances people that might, what do people need to know about this topic?
Yeah, so probiotics, as we've mentioned before, you find them in fermented foods and things, but when what they do is, they assist you with your immunity and so many things that we've mentioned already, even some cancer-fighting properties and so on. But prebiotics are non-digestible food ingredients that actually assist the growth of specific probiotics. Okay. So you can find them in things like, wheat, onions, bananas, honey, garlic, leeks. There's a lot of food products that actually support the growth of very specific intestinal bacteria. Inulin is another thing that you find, like in cabbage, I believe. And it just supports that growth of the positive bacteria in your colon. FOS is another one, fructooligosaccharides, right? It's this, indigestible probiotic supporting additive. And they'll include that with a probiotic supplement so that you get more bang for your buck. You're not only adding the bacteria, but you're also putting in an ingredient that will allow better hosting, better growth of that, and nurture more of your natural intestinal growth.
So there are prebiotics, which are not the bacteria, but substances that promote the bacteria.
Right.
Then there are probiotics, which are the bacteria themselves, the positive bacteria themselves. And then there are combinations.
Yes, there are combinations of different ones for different effects. The sort of process of combining them in a beneficial way is called symbiotics.
Symbiotics.
Yeah, you're creating a synthesis of the probiotics and the prebiotics in such a way to create, a result. You're trying to create a more healthy environment for your intestinal bacteria.
Okay.
And it should be stated that the prebiotics are indigestible. That's why they get to go all the way down into your colon without being destroyed by your stomach acid and things like that. And a lot of probiotics do get destroyed by your digestive acids because that's kind of what your digestive acid is supposed to do. Besides breaking down food, it's also to protect you from negative bacteria. And
kill little bacteria and viruses and funguses and
it sometimes
fungi.
Kills, with prejudice, and sometimes it kills without prejudice.
Right.
Even the good stuff sometimes gets, murdered by the strong HCl in your stomach.
Yeah.
But, you can, depending on how you eat things, that's why things with fiber protects. When you eat whole foods, you're getting a lot of times a lot of that stuff trapped inside the fiber, and it protects it and allows it to get all the way down into your intestines.
Okay. Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
So prebiotics, probiotics, and symbiotics. Now, I think you had said a little while ago that some natural sources of things like FOS, for example, would be onions, garlic, leeks, honey, bananas, these kinds of things. And
uncooked honey.
Uncooked honey. And I would say probably for all those things, uncooked bananas.
Definitely.
We don't usually cook our bananas,
but it's not the banana starbursts.
Yeah, right. Yeah, definitely. But eating raw garlic, eating raw onions.
Yeah.
Have you ever picked up an onion and just ate it like an apple?
I have.
Yeah, it's quite an experience.
It is an experience.
It really
with mustard on it, believe it or not.
Really? No, that I have not tried.
Yeah, apparently I like intense experiences.
Yeah. Well, I watched a cooking show. I think it was Gordon Ramsay on YouTube talking about how to cut an onion. And you got to avoid that little eye because that's the part that really makes your eyes water. The little eye of the onion up on the top, the little knob. I just might go home and peel an onion a little bit and just chomp down like an apple.
Oh yeah. I hear that goes over really well with wives.
Yes, wives.
If you eat an onion right before bed.
Yeah.
I hear that
they're guaranteed
very
to
popular.
leave you alone so you can sleep.
Right.
Yeah, which is always a problem for us, right? Well, speaking of eating things like apples, is it true that there is a particular type of apple that seems to promote a very special probiotic bacteria?
That's really fascinating. I have read that eating Granny Smith apples, of all the apples, from Braeburn's, Fuji's, Golden Delicious, all that, it was specifically the Granny Smith apples that seemed to promote an increase in the C. minuta, or the Christianella minuta, which is that one strain of gut bacteria that seems to be present in the skinnier, the leaner types, right? And isn't very present at all in the obese types of body, right? That seems to promote it. Of course, this is yet to be totally confirmed all across the board, but in some studies that they did, they actually found that to be true. So, gosh, it's time to eat some more Granny Smith apples,
Granny
right?
Smith apples. They're the one apple that gets the least love.
It's true.
They're hard and they're tart.
Dry.
They're dry.
Astringent.
There they are, but they have something nice to share with us, perhaps.
They do, and I think this is an interesting correlation. In Ayurvedic medicine, I was always taught that it's the, apples in general, right? A little bit more on the kapha side because they're more astringent as far as fruit goes. But it's specifically the Granny Smiths that are the most astringent and most sort of dry, right?
Yeah.
And those are most beneficial for kapha.
Yeah, and kapha would be the body type of There's three body types.
Yes.
Right. Kapha, Pitta, and Vata.
Right.
And kapha would be the heavier, phlegm-producing.
Yes.
So more obese types of people would be more likely to be kapha.
They tend to hang on to water more. They tend to hang on to food more. They tend to gain weight more easily. Their digestion seems to be a little bit slower.
Yeah.
The traditional advice for kapha tends to be that they need to eat the astringent fruits rather than the real sweet, heavy fruits.
Look at that ancient Indian wisdom validated by modern science.
Yeah.
Or you could just clean your plates with a dirty rag, like the lady in India did when she was cleaning our rooms. But
yeah, I'm sure if you had a good bacteriological infection or a virus or a parasite, you'd probably, certain ones would probably have to lose a lot of weight very rapidly.
Yeah. Talk about a fecal transplant.
Oh my gosh.
Literally taking it right from the hole in the ground to your plate.
Talk about not being able to eat for 6 months.
Disgusting.
So it leads me to an interesting question. Another fruit that is recommended for kapha types is jujube.
Oh.
Have you ever had a jujube?
Yes.
Okay. And
absolutely.
For those who are listening, we are not talking about the candy that you see at the movie theaters.
Yeah.
It's not a gummy bear or some kind of gummy candy. It's an actual fruit called jujube.
Yes.
And it's a small little fruit that is extremely astringent. It's sort of a dry, slightly sweet, almost apple-y taste to it, but not quite. I mean, it has its own flavor, but that's another fruit that is recommended for kapha. And I would wonder, just the traditional side of me as well as the scientifically curious side of me wants to know whether they'll eventually find that jujube has some similar properties as far as supporting the Christianella minuta bacteria.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, I mean, it's logical, not necessarily true, but I would love to find out if that's true.
In Chinese medicine, jujubes are, the fruit part, right, is dazao.
Oh, that's
dazao,
right.
Large dates.
Yeah.
When you eat them like right off the tree, they do have a little bit of an apple-y kind of a quality to them.
Kind of woody, pulpy, dry.
We are used to seeing them in the Chinese medicine community once they're dried out like dates.
Yeah.
So it translates, dazao translates as like large dates. It's not at all like, the medjool dates or anything like that.
And not in the date family either, right?
No, I don't believe they are. They just call them,
because dates are extremely sugary.
Oh, very sugary, yeah.
But jujubes are not.
These jujubes are in almost every Chinese medicine formula. They're usually combined with licorice root, guansao, Radix glycyrrhiza, and that combination of licorice root and jujube fruits sort of harmonizes all of the other ingredients in the formula to make it, digestible and make all of the ingredients interact smoothly with each other. And it makes me wonder if, they probably would not have known about intestinal bacteria, obviously, back then, but they were maybe doing something with it. Maybe they were assisting with the absorption, the assimilation of these powerful, sometimes nasty tasting decoctions.
Right.
Now, these fruits would nourish the heart. They would nourish blood, but also have some strengthening effect on your digestive system. And a weak digestion in Chinese medicine leads to phlegm. Phlegm, in Chinese medicine terms, is not just mucus, but accumulations in the body like lipomas, tumors, bone spurs, and adipose tissue. So like if you're fat and overweight, you have a phlegmy constitution, just like what you described as the kapha body type in Ayurvedic medicine. So there you go.
Can we get into that for just a second?
Yeah, sure.
Because I'm realizing as I'm listening to you here that it's kind of like, when you speak jargon with somebody who kind of has a basic understanding of the jargon already, a person listening could maybe have a difficulty forming the same connections because using some inside language, right?
Sure.
Can we talk a little bit about what phlegm really is? Because I know we're not really talking about just the Western concept of what phlegm is, right?
Correct.
We're talking about something that includes that, but is also something else.
Right.
Because you talked about bone spurs and obesity, and certainly adipose tissue is not mucus per se, but from the perspective of Chinese medicine and the way you're discussing it in those traditional ideas, it is discussed that way, as though it is.
Yeah.
Right? So what's all that all about?
Sure. So in Chinese medicine, well, in the English version of Chinese medicine, we are using English words to represent Chinese words or Chinese characters.
Right.
And we just have to choose the best word we can find. These are two different languages. There's no such thing as a perfect transposition from this word is always going to be that word.
And different worldviews too.
And totally different worldviews.
And different eras that it was formed in.
Exactly. So
different cosmologies.
Right.
Yeah.
Totally. The toilets flush the opposite direction. The word phlegm in English refers to a mucus type of material. We all know this, right? Mm-hmm. In Chinese, it's
anyone who's had a cold knows that.
Anybody, yeah. In Chinese, the word is tan. Okay, tan. And tan is translated as phlegm, but the English word phlegm could never capture the entire scope of the word tan. Mm-hmm. So tan is phlegm. It is mucus coming out of your nose. It is mucus that a person might cough up. Okay, that is also tan. And it's used that way in Chinese medicine. However, the Chinese concept of tan is when fluids in the body become pathological and they congeal. So it's accumulations of fluids or accumulations of tissues. And that's what phlegm is in Chinese medicine. So in addition to the type of phlegm that we see, they also talk about hidden phlegm, which would be certain specific symptoms such as wheezing. Wheezing is called hidden phlegm. Mm-hmm. There are other types of hidden phlegm that are associated with mental, emotional, cognitive dysfunctions. Many of the mental illnesses have a component of phlegm, like schizophrenia, for example, severe depressions, bipolar disorder. All of these things would have, or many of these things from a Chinese medicine perspective, would have a component of phlegm to them. So
psychological things,
yes.
That's an interesting one.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be a leap for someone coming from a really Western mindset, right?
Right. And so how is it that we treat, well, the same kinds of herbs that are treating actual mucousy types of phlegm will be added to these formulas that are treating these mental emotional conditions. You know, so there is some kind of interesting link there. Now, to get back to the idea of adipose tissue, of fat, an accumulation of fat in the body by Chinese medicine standards is tan, it's phlegm. A lump under your skin could be phlegm, like a swollen lymph node, or a little fat tumor, a lipoma. That could be phlegm. Maybe a skin cancer that's growing is an accumulation of tissue. It could be phlegm, could be tan. So we use different categories of herbs that treat phlegm, but we have subcategories within the phlegm herbs, right? Some of them are better for the mucousy types of phlegm, and some of them are better for the mental emotional aspects, and some of them are better for, the lumps and the tumors and that sort of thing. So it's very important when we learn about medicine from another culture to sort of loosen up our thinking about the language around it and know that words are just symbols. Words just give us, help us form an internal representation, as to what that thing is. And we got to be real careful when we already have our preconceived internal representation.
Right.
And then we say, what? Bipolar disorder and phlegm? That's ridiculous. Well, they've completely missed the full scope of the word.
Well, that's, a key in communication too. I mean, you try to be as precise as you can if you're teaching, right? And you try to be somewhat consistent, but at the same time, we have to remember that they are representations, and there is some intuition going on in the recipient, the listener, in order to grasp the meaning.
Yeah.
To understand and maybe one way of looking at language is that, the words that you choose are an opener rather than a closer. I mean, sure, they close out certain ideas, but they also open you to an inquiry. They open you to an experience, but then that experience is yours. So as you grow in learning how to, attribute the meaning of that word and what you're going to connect the meanings to in your own experience, it's yours. It becomes yours the moment you start building those connections. Between what's been told to you and what you're starting to form as your own picture, your own internal representation of what that is.
Right.
Yeah,
right.
We're getting tangential a little bit, but it's so important because just as we're finding out that now all of a sudden there's all this research saying bacteria can totally change your health, that's true for concepts too and ideas.
Right.
And, many of us in the West are taught that things are pretty linear. You learn in a very compartmentalized way. Either first there's this and then there's that.
Yeah.
This is not connected to that. And then all of a sudden you get older, you start, getting exposed to college level research papers and college level people who've traveled the world and all of a sudden you get multidisciplinary studies, and suddenly the world gets more connected, but also more complex, because it's not so easy then to draw nice, neat little boxes around everything and have everything be, understood that way.
Yeah.
There's the mind and there's the body. Well, hang on a second. More and more we see how related the mind is to the body.
Yeah.
And vice versa. They affect one another.
And now it's being quantified.
Yeah.
Yeah, in ways that, we couldn't have imagined at one point.
Yeah.
So here we are talking about these little bacteria, and you and me and the wonderful people that might be listening to this conversation of ours, we are all forming our own internal representations about what these bacteria mean. We're forming little pictures in our mind, where maybe some of us are picturing intestines and certain results that we might want. It's just good to keep this in mind as we go through these little adventures with these interesting topics, that we're just playing with internal representations. We need to keep them loose.
Right.
Just keep them loose,
Loose,
baby.
flexible, expanded. On the topic of microbiomes, just like an idea influences a person, your persona influences a person, your microbiomes influence people.
Yeah.
I mean, the contact that you have, just a handshake, If you wrestle or you give someone a hug or, you share a bite to eat with the same utensil or whatever, you're exchanging microbiomes.
Right. And bonding with our dogs and our cats and, sharing their microbiomes.
Yeah.
And, it's fascinating. And this sort of comes to the idea, and this is something that I wanted to bring up with you, is this idea of the bacteria being self. Are they really self? Like my microbiome, just like there was a time when we looked at the mind and the body being separate, right? Right now, there is a risk of looking at the body and the microbiome being separate. They influence each other, but they're not the same thing. Well, where do we begin and where do these bacteria begin? I like the idea that we need to loosen up our boundaries as to what is self. And I would like to just assume that the microbiome and these bacteria, they really are us. If they can influence our thoughts, our moods, our digestion, things that our body produces, then they are us, and we are them. So it's neat to learn about a new aspect of ourself. Right? So if we're learning about these bacteria and how they influence us, and we're learning about how we can influence them and how we can put more of them into our body with prebiotics and probiotics and symbiotics and all these things, I just want to invite anybody listening to play with this idea that to learn about these things is really to learn about you. It really is you. And you are a fascinating topic.
You are.
You are a fascinating topic, and it's neat to learn more about what you are, who you are, and to learn new aspects of yourself that you didn't know about. And something like this topic of bacteria, and finding out that, oh my God, I'm that too?
When you take a sample of the microbiome, you're taking a sample of the person. And if you were to clean yourself completely of it, which I think there's probably some people who might feel creeped out by the idea that they have all this bacteria growing on them and inside of them. But if you got rid of them, you'd die. You would be absolutely incapable of defending yourself from the tremendous amount of potential infections and so on. All of us, that's one of the things that the Microbiome Project talks about, is that all of us have all of these lethal diseases and viruses and bacteria in our body, and it's the environment that it lives in, the enriched microbiome environment that prevents you from dying or getting really, really ill from those very things you're carrying with you all the time.
Yeah.
And you're surrounded by it. It's not just inside you, it's around you.
It is.
It's in the air. It's in the food, and some environments are heavier on that than others. But if you lived in a sterile environment, you just wouldn't live.
Yeah.
I had a client. They sort of had I guess you could call it germophobia.
Okay.
Right, and she couldn't touch things without washing her hands or having some kind of protective coating. Every doorknob in her house had to have like a Kleenex to open it up. She wouldn't sit on her own couch or her own seat without putting a fresh towel on there.
Yeah.
She had to clean the bathroom each and every time she used the bathroom. She talked about it as though she was hallucinating viruses and bacteria floating around her all the time, trying to get in, almost like you imagine ghosts are trying to penetrate and possess you, right?
How terrifying.
It was terrifying for her. But what's fascinating is just a shift in her picture about bacteria, and much of the things that we've been talking about in this episode, was a component of the lesson for her to learn to appreciate that each and every time she was being exposed to her family and her, habits that perhaps she thought were less hygienic than her own or whatever, that she's enriching her immunity. Just shifting that psychological sort of vantage point where now she could see it from a different point of view and see that maybe the exposure was making her stronger.
Yeah.
You've been listening to The Authenticity Show. with your hosts Carlos Casados and Satch Purcell. The show is produced by Oliver Althoen. Our theme music is composed by Oliver Althoen. You can find more information on our website, AuthenTicityShow.com. Thanks for listening, and have an authentic day.